Hello, and welcome to our class today on Buddhist localization. So how does a religion put down roots in a specific place? Now, this idea of local versus translocal is something I'm going to come back to a lot. It's one of the big theoretical categories that I use in my own work and that I think are really important for understanding religious studies in Asia. So you have a local thing or a local deity which is connected specifically to a place. It is very specific to a place, to a people, to a geography. Then you have translocal, so these would be sort of deities that can be found anywhere, or a religious idea that can be found anywhere, that can be picked up and put down and will be applicable anywhere else. What we do find is that local deities tend to be more immanent, as in they will interact with you and they interact with the world, and translocal deities are more transcendent, as in they are off in the heavenly abodes, are dealing with big stuff. So local deities are these sort of small godlings of a place, whereas translocal deities are your bigger deities like Shiva or Vishnu, in particular Narayana or any form of Vishnu, really. All right, so what we're going to look at specifically today is localization in the place of Ajanta, a cave complex that was started by the Theravada Hinayanas, folks in 1st or 2nd century BCE, but had a whole bunch of revitalization and new building in the 5th century. In particular, we're going to be looking at that 5th century today. So Ajanta, what's the thing about this place? So Ajanta is actually right there. You see it's kind of over by Bombay, sort of in the western middle of India. And we're going to take a little trip to Ajanta. I've been there a couple of times. I'll show you pictures from there. What's interesting here is we're going to take a tour of Ajanta, then we're going to talk about some theory, and then we're going to talk about how 3 specific deities, specifically Nagas and the Naga King, Nagendra, and this Yakshini, this female forest spirit named Harati, and the very Buddha are localized in Ajanta. So what happens with the Nagas is these sort of local deities became incorporated into Buddhism. And as De Caroli will say, they also become in that community. They become a witness to the art at the place. However, also by having Nagendra, the Naga King, be sort of an important figure in Ajanta, that also gives the monks and the place of Ajanta power over sort of those existing local pantheons. The Yakshini Harati is a translocal Buddhist entity, but she appears very local. She looks like one of these dangerous deities that eats children. But in fact, we see that her story and the story of her conversion to Buddhism was found all over the Buddhist world. And finally, the Buddha, that most translocal of all figures, becomes localized when his image in Cave 20 is doubled on a local ruler named Harishena. So what is Ajanta? So as I said, they have a first building period, 100 BC to 100 CE. But in the 5th century, we see for a short period of time, they become Mahayanist. Now, the later phase actually shows that a lot of the monasteries and the caves that we see weren't actually occupied for very long. This probably had to do with the fact that you had a local ruler, this Harishena, and the Yuvakatakas, which is delightful to say. They had a lot of power, and when they had power, they sponsored this monastery. When they then came out of power, pretty soon later, because that period of time, there's a lot of jockeying around for power in that area. When they stopped having a lot of power, well, the things fell apart. And in fact, the very field of Ajanta was sort of unknown. Like locals knew about it, but nobody else really knew about it. So probably around the 6th century, you just stopped seeing anybody going there, and it was reclaimed by the jungle. So even today, it's really hard to get to. You have to go to Aurangabad, which is kind of a horrible, tricky place to be. It's kind of an industrial town. And then you have to take a car. There are no direct buses to Ajanta. And the car ride's terrifying because you have to hire some maniac that wants to drive so fast, so fast. I remember just saying, Jaldi se nahi, not so fast. Jaldi se bhi nahi. I was like, Rukia, Rukia, Rukia. I'm like, stop, stop, stop. As I was driving out there, every time I end up having some guy that wants to drive way too fast to get out there and make me stop at, you know, his buddy's tea stall, his buddy's restaurant, even though I want to stop at other places. It's a whole rigmarole. It's hard to get there. Okay, so then you have this king, Harishena, which literally means one whose army is related to Hari or Hariti. He has an honorific name of Hariti Putra, the son of Hariti. So you see there's this connection with Hariti in that ruler. And we see that this one king, Harishena, who supported Ajanta, was actually had a sovereign center that was 100 miles southeast. So why would he sponsor this one place here? Well, there was a route that we can see that goes between his imperial center to some far-flung villages that he sponsored, and Ajanta is actually on that route. So there would have been people kind of going back and forth and coming across this as they go to some of the more far-flung areas of the kingdom and back to the imperial center. So Ajanta on a map, as you can see, is right here. You have Bombay all the way over to the west, and this is where it is. And this is just kind of, it's on the western side of the Deccan Plateau, which is a large plateau in sort of the center of South India. And it's in a really rural, kind of off the beaten path sort of area. So here's a diorama that they have outside of, and now we're on our trip to India sort of part. This diorama is on the outside of it. There's a little greeting center you go in. It gives you a sense like what it would look like from above. And you can see that sort of ring around the side. That's where there are all these caves. So the whole monastic complex is made up of caves that are cut into that side of rock. There are roughly 30 caves. And you can see sort of how they're arranged around the rock, the rock mountain that sort of that surrounds this river valley. So here are the caves at a distance. So you can see this is when I was walking up to it. You can see that they have carved pillars and some have vaulted ceilings. So some are really big and have elaborate like paintings in them. Some have really beautiful stone carvings. Others are really basic and they're probably just a place where people would sleep and meditate. So we see that the older caves are the more basic. And then the larger caves are from the later period, the ones that are more adorned and have more sort of, have more images and paintings and whatnot. So to get an idea of how big these are, you can see these people here. Now, this whole temple complex was forgotten and it was discovered by the British in 1819. Of course, locals knew about it. And then in 1840s, they began to clear and restore it. And at some point, they built this big sort of road around there. That wouldn't have been there in the past. But it's always made me wonder, you know, how the monks got around who were living there and just how much of a pathway there would have been in front of the caves cut out of the river, or cut out of the rock. So a lot of these are frescoes. A lot of these have frescoes. So what that is it's like plaster that they put on top of rock and then they paint the plaster. Because this is really hard to these are hard to maintain. A lot of the caves that are very dark are lit with this like special light so you don't ruin the frescoes. I always wondered though, you know, how are people seeing these in the first place? How are the monks seeing them? Were they having, did they have lamps? You know, I mean, the sun really doesn't come in there. So how did they see to paint these and how did they see to enjoy them as well? So here are some of those frescoes. You can see they're really lovely, but they're in somewhat disrepair. They're painting on plaster, and you can go into those caves and in very low light you can try to take a picture. You can't use a flash and you can try to look at them. And honestly, you know, I like looking at the paintings in books, but the couple times I've been to Ajanta, every time I'm in those caves I'm like, I can't really see anything. So some of the caves are really like, they feel like caves, you know, it's like there's the raw rock walls with the pillars that they cut out, and then, you know, portals to kind of like deity rooms and whatnot. Others look more like cathedrals. This one has a sort of a vaulted ceiling. It really makes you feel like you're on the underside of a belly of a whale. And actually, if you were looking here, if you'd be behind you, you'd see they actually have a choir loft above where probably monks would chant out loud. Now, close up, you can see that we have, this is what's called a chaitya or a stupa, this thing in the center. Now, I'm going to talk about those in a second. The cathedral ceiling, and now the stupa is like, it's like a bulbous thing that has one spire that comes out of it. It'll often have a Buddha on them. And that's what sort of the Buddha in this particular cave looks like. So here are some other stupas, the ones from Kathmandu, all the way to the right, that's Swayambhunath. Then the other one is, I think, Thai. And then the left one is Tibetan, and it could be, who knows, could be in Santa Fe for all I know. What these were supposed to be is they were reliquaries. So chaityas and stupas were places where bones from the Buddha, supposedly everyone has a Buddhist bone in them, were placed in order that the Buddha could be remembered and worshipped. But what we find is with inscriptions, we find that they were building them all over the place. Like you look at all of the ones on the one on the right, and we see that monks were building them to cause benefit. So one, monks had money to build stuff. That's interesting. But what did they build? They built these little stupas and chaityas. And why did they build them? They usually, according to the dedications, said they built them for the benefit of their deceased parents. So there's a whole bunch of sort of oddly incongruous ideas for Buddhists to have in there. But you see these stupas all over the place in all Buddhist cultures. So here we see this sitting Buddha. He is in that imperial form that we see as well. Or, I mean, he also looks an awful lot like one of these Naga Kings. But considering the place where it is, this is most likely the Buddha. And then surrounding on the rock walls are depictions of different versions of the Buddha from his past lives. We have a collection of tales called the Jataka tales. They're sort of like just so stories for Buddhists, and they tell the different lives that the Buddha had before he became the Buddha, and they usually have some sort of a moral tale around them. I'll talk more about them in a minute. So let's do a little bit of theory here. What is local and what is translocal? So the local is sort of a single zone. It is a single space. We have local deities and local rites. Like this sort of shrine here, which looks kind of Taoist to me. But I like that it's sort of basic, and it shows that you're appealing to sort of small deities likely of a place. Translocal, just like it sounds, is not collected to a place. A translocal thing is a religion or deity who is not tied to any specific location or people. This deity or religious system can be worshipped anywhere. So what happens is regions would sort of develop with their own localities, and that would cause sort of regional differences and different local types of religions. With translocal religion, it all looks kind of the same. With local religions, it just looks all different. All the practices, all the deities, all the people surrounded are different. So what we sort of wonder is, how does religion come to a place in general? Well, one thing I want you to understand is that in sort of all sort of Indic cultures, you have what's called a mesocosm. So you have the land of the earth, the cosm, and then you have the heavens. And between that, there's an intermediate space. And in that intermediate space that we cannot see, it touches heaven, it touches earth, and it's in between there. But it's filled with all sorts of deities. This is where your Nagas and your Yakshas and your Bhuttas and your Kinnaras sort of all live. Now, usually these are described as just a horde of ghosts or snake spirits or dryads or whatnot. But in addition to that, you will have specific Nagas or Yakshas or whatnot who will be sort of, they'll have some power over the horde. It's like they're the bosses of the horde. So you can pray to them and they'll keep the horde in line, and transacting with them will allow you to transact with that horde. In Ajanta, we see that most of the depictions of sort of spirit deities are Nagas. So this suggests that there was either a whole bunch of snake worship, because Nagas are associated with snakes, that was originally there in the Ajanta area, or that the Buddhists just knew that if they start appealing to Nagas, it will appeal to other people. So this mesocosm is more immanent than transcendent. Now, immanent means like worldly and can be interacted with by us. Transcendent means completely beyond us. So if a deity is higher than the mesocosm, they tend to be translocal. So in this mesocosm, just think of it as an intermediary space that is between the earth and the heavens. And this is where that sort of grand supernatural horde of Nagas and Yakshas are going to live. So as I'd said before, these are the Nagas, so snake spirits, Bhutas or ghosts, Yakshas, Dryads, or Kinnaras. Look at them all over here. And they're all over the place. In line with this, we have what are called spirit deities. That's the word that Caroli uses. So that's something beyond just a local spirit, but smaller than a deity. So these Nagas he calls spirit deities, which I think is a good way to put it. So there is an element in Indian culture that was coined by a man named Redfield. It talks about Sanskritization. Now, in Sanskritization, what you do is you take a local deity and you make him more culturally powerful by giving him a Sanskrit name, by connecting him to a larger deity. So if you have a little Bhairava that you call Bhairav, who's just your local deity, if you call him Bhairava, more Sanskrit sounding, then he sort of can then become seen as a version of Shiva. So if you have a deity that you want to have become more powerful or prominent, you give it a Sanskrit name. You also stop offering it bloody worship and stop offering it liquor and whatnot. You make them vegetarian. So I have depicted here 3 different Hanumans that you can find around the Kathmandu Valley. So the first one is just sort of an anamorphic rock that sort of looks like it's got a face and they've strung some cloth around it. This is what a lot of sort of local deities look like. It'll just be a rock with a mask and that's it, or a tree. Then, you see to the bottom, you see a more iconic form. You see that this would be sort of an intermediary. You can tell it's an intermediary form. You can tell it's a Nepali image because people have smeared all sorts of food over Hanuman's mouth. Hanuman's this monkey god. If you tried that in India, you'd probably get your hand cut off. And then on the left, you see this, great iconic, Hanuman that anyone would recognize in very modern form. Over time, this process of Sanskritization loses the local character of that deity to the point that some people may not even remember the original deity that was there. So at that point, they just say, oh, that's Shiva. They forget that once it was Bhairava, once it was Bhairav, once it was just called Hey Pop. So the more you Sanskritize something, you risk the chance of losing the deity completely over time. Now, there's sort of this argument that Cohen really leads with, and it's an important point of the class, that says that Buddhism is essentially texts and philosophy and meditation, but sort of lesser Buddhism, not true Buddhism, would be the practices of the everyday life and daily rituals of Buddhists. People say, it's just superstition. The great Buddhism is the elaborate philosophy and meditation. Well, as I consistently argue, that Buddhism is about what Buddhists do. Many scholars argue that the only real Buddhists are monks, not indigenous folks who call themselves Buddhists. So Buddhists, these Buddhist monks, are supposed to be antisocial. They're supposed to be not interacting with the world and doing their own thing. But we see that Buddhist monks interact with laity all the time. So what we want to see is how they interact with local people and local deities. So if we have this ideal that true Buddhism is just meditation and glorious texts, then we're going to do what C.J. Fuller calls a stock anthropological error, when they convert an indigenous ideological distinction into an analytic concept and then apply it to the empirical evidence to try to divide what is actually united by common underlying themes and principles. In other words, I say Buddhism is just monks because monks told me that Buddhism is just monks, and then I completely ignore Buddhist people doing stuff all over the place. Or if I run into like a Hindu Swami who says Hinduism is essentially about vegetarianism, and then I go and I look at Hindus who eat meat and go, you're not really Hindus. To which they would go, what are you even talking about? So what we want to avoid is looking at something in the culture, generalizing it, and then taking that generality and then applying that as a judgment to people within that culture. So when we're talking about Cohen's work and the place of Ajanta, Cohen argues that a defining characteristic of any form of Buddhism is the place, for place sets the idiosyncratic and indigenous on par with the translocal and universal, the here and there with the everywhere. So what we want to see when we look at sort of a local place is we want to be able to see the local and translocal principles. We want to be able to see what's specific to the area. We also want to see what they bring in of wider Buddhism, and we want to see how those interact. And that's where we see the give and take of religion, the local and the translocal. And one of the ways we can really look at this is in exchange relationships between physical and non-physical local entities. So lay people would give food to monks. They wouldn't get anything back, but the monks would do rituals that would either, one, give them good luck, or two, stave off bad things, or three, regulate the issues with local deities that could give them a problem. But the idea is, and this is called sort of generalized exchange. Generalized exchange is when you give something to someone in order to get something later down the road. So I give alms to monks in order to get good luck later, as opposed to, say, sort of, I give food to my friend and he gives me food, right back. So let's look at three of these. We're going to look at our Naga King, Nagendra. We're going to look at our Yakshini named Harati, and we're going to look at the royal Harishena Buddha, so the Buddha that's shaped on Harishena. So who is this Naga King? Well, let's remember that we have both human actors, including monks and lay folks that live in Ajanta, but so do supernatural creatures, and they've always lived there. So we would have had a Naga King, some king of all the snaky type spirits who live at Ajanta, and when they built Ajanta, he was out of a home. So they built him a home and integrated him into their system. So let's look at the story here. There's one famous story that Cohen wants to tell, and I've depicted some Nagas here. We have a Nagini on the left and a Naga on the right. You see them all over. So worship of Nagas you find all over the place, and they do have a sort of vagueness about them, but generally if you start talking to people, they'll tell you about how there's actually a specific Naga deity there that has a name and a story and is of a place. So in the story that Cohen tells, there's this Naga King who's installed outside of the Cave 16. Now, Nagas control fertility, water, snakes, and floods. Now, in the story that he tells about these bad Buddhists, he says that they were staunch enemies of the Buddha, but became loyal disciples. So there's these two Nagas who were originally disciples of Buddha in their former form, but they were bad disciples. They were called the Gang of Six. They just did everything wrong and were really disparaging of Buddhists. They were terrible monks. So these guys get reborn as Nagas. Now they're pissed off because they're like, wait a minute, I saw the Buddha in my last life, but I don't see him now. So they decide they're going to challenge Buddhism. They're going to kill monks. They're going to make Buddhism not work in the world. So the Buddha's like, this is a problem. So so he says, I'll go find him. So the Buddha goes and he finds these Nagas and he teaches them a version of the Dharma in 4 lines. Maybe it's just the 4 Noble Truths. And they sink back into their watery depths. And then they go, and they're not going to get it because they had directs, hanging out with him all the time before in a past life. They didn't get it. So they're like, wait a minute, was that just the Buddha up there? And instead of contemplating the Buddhism in 4 lines, like, wait, we got to go take another look. So they go up, rise back up. The Buddha has left, but he's installed an image of himself. When they rise up, they see him like, oh, he's still there. I guess we'll just hang out under the waters, be cool, and contemplate the Dharma. So this is a story about how some of these Nagas can be converted. In the same way, this Naga King, who might have been in conflict, and we don't have this story recorded, with Buddhism, would have encountered the Buddha or encountered the Buddhist monks, and he would have pledged his, after their magical might or their contest or just witnessing the sanctity of them, he'd pledge his desire to protect Buddhism and protect the place. This is our Naga King. Now, there's another story that some Chinese monks tell about how monks would behave poorly. They would just piss and shit, spit everywhere, let wind all over the place, and this would piss off the Nagas. So what folk did was they set up Naga shrines all over the place so that, monks would be like, oh, I shouldn't pee here. There's a god right there. So in this sense, you can install the Nagas in places didactic. It reminds monks to behave better. And in fact, when you read in the Vinaya, so the monastic regulations, you hear all these stories about monks behaving badly. And they're often a hoot to read. So whenever you have monks, you will have bad monks. All right, so how's our Naga King worshipped? So we do read that at Ajanta, there were monks who made offerings to the Naga King every day in order to preserve Ajanta from plagues and calamities and snake bites. So as long as the Snake King was fed, the Nagas aren't going to raise hell. So you feed the king, he keeps his followers under control. That's the goal. According to Cohen on page 379, the monks propitiate the Naga, who in turn cause a good monsoon, enriching the local deity, which in turn enriches the monks. So the monks start in a system where they worship the Naga King. The Nagas make sure there's no floods and there's good rains and whatnot. This causes the laity to have more food. This causes the laity to better support the monks. And it also is a situation where the laity would have originally done worship to the Nagas themselves, but they entrust that worship to the monks because they have this idea like, these guys are monks, they must be able to do this better. So the monks take over, and this is a system that you see Buddhist monks do quite a bit. They take over a local system in order to sort of do it better, but that also causes them to have closer connections to the laity. The other interesting thing about that De Caroli really makes is that our Naga King is both worshipped in some places, such as right here in between the two elephants. That's the alcove where he is in Cave 16, but he's also a co-worshipper. So not only is he worshipped to get goodness in the world and whatnot, but he also worships the Buddha himself and witnesses the teachings around and the meditations of people. So you have to see him in two ways. One, as a protecting deity of the place, but also as another adherent who is also there worshiping the Buddha himself. Okay, so the Naga King we see here, he's actually in sort of a royal posture, sort of surveying his space. It's not the imperial posture that we see later of the Buddha sitting on a throne. So he's found at the edge of this complex. And the idea is that he had a home there, but it was displaced. So they give him a space at the end, like Temple 16 is like kind of all the way at the edge. So from the periphery, he rules over all the other Nagas, but he has a new place. He has a new place to live. So he is depicted somewhere as a co-worshipper at Ajanta, and at other places, he is a devotee. So the Nagas and the Naga Kings are both devotees and guardians. Cohen writes, in the end, this is not a story about the syncretistic appropriation of a local Naga cult into Buddhism. Rather, it tells how Buddhists make use of local deities in order to emplace themselves within a society. This is how worshiping local deities and interacting with them allows monks to set down roots in a location. So the Nagas actually enter into a relationship with the Buddhists. The Buddhists have displaced their worship cult and disrupted their holy site. But now the Buddhists feed and take care of the Nagas. This endears them to the locals, to the laity, for it provides for the local deities and shows continuity with prior religious acts. The Nagas both support the monks by giving them good results, rains, no droughts, protection from disease, but they also don't hurt the monks. They don't actively attack them, and they ward off the snakes that are representative of them. And if you're in India, there's always snakes around somewhere. As I said before, these monks become sort of religious actors par excellence. So their worship of the Nagas is better than the older way. We're going to see this dynamic again. So then the Nagas become sort of powerful local protector spirits. We actually see that there's a monk named Buddhabhadra who writes the inscription by the Naga King. And he says that the Buddha is completely free and not present in our space, but we can give him offerings and he will intervene to help us at the same time. So how much more so, this monk argues, that if the Buddha will help us if there's offerings, how much more so these local little deities, if we give them offers in a Buddhist manner, they're going to help us even more so. So De Caroli actually uses almost all the same data as Cohen. So if you look at them side by side, and I think De Caroli is actually easier to read, but it's older, you'll see that they quote almost all the exact same stories. De Caroli doesn't add that much more. He just brings this interpretation that Cohen misses, that these Nagas are actually participating in the rituals of Ajanta, and that they are the witnesses of the acts at Ajanta, that they are equal worshippers to the monks in a certain way. So De Caroli argues that the Nagas operate in two ways. One, as objects of devotion to sort of avoid plagues and droughts and floods and snakes, and two, as audiences for the art and the rituals. So you see local Nagas that we don't see, Then we have the shrines to the Naga King. Then we have like little Nagas all over the place, and all sorts of the frescoes and and little like pictures of them all over the place. In that, we should see them not as just decorations or embellishment, but we should see that those entities are also alive and are a part of the scene and are a part of the worship that's going on. They are witnessing it, and they are getting into it. They are worshiping as well, along with the monks and the people that are there. All right, and then we're also, that he also argues, is a lot of these Nagas, when they have sort of a mythological story behind them, they were usually very good disciples. So they also inspire not only lay folk and monks to be better people by the examples of these Nagas, but they also inspire the other like local Nagas to be good Buddhists. If they're like, and if they are Buddhists and starting to backslide, they can look to the Nagas of Ajanta and see them as good examples, to inspire them to keep up their Buddhist practices. So we do see the Nagas and a number of tales, in these Jataka tales, these stories of the Buddha's prior rebirths. So one thing to understand is in a lot of these stories, the Buddha will do something, and then tons of people show up. Animals, and monks, and lay people, and gods. A part of this descriptions of this grand sort of, these grand gatherings around any of the Buddha's events or sermons is it describes all these different supernatural beings. So we should have a notion in Ajanta that we're always surrounded by those supernatural beings, but that those things are going to be pulled toward Buddhism. Okay, so there's also a story in which the Buddha is giving a sermon and all these Nagas show up, but then Garuda shows up. Garuda is the eagle that Vishnu rides, and he's also known to kill Nagas. And the Buddha says, don't worry, Nagas, I'll protect you. Nobody's going to kill you around me. So there is also an idea that Buddhism provides a place where those Nagas can take refuge from a world that wants to harm them or from supernatural dangers. Okay. So here's some other Nagas. You see on the left, that's sort of like a Thai Naga, and you see there's tons of heads. To the right above, these are small stones in Kerala and these little temples called kuas that, as you can see, have a whole bunch of snakes in them. Snake worship is big there. And then down at the bottom, we see a depiction of our Naga King from Ajanta. So what are the functions of the Nagas? One, they show the authority of Buddhism. They show Buddhism has power over them, and they're controlled by Buddhism, which shows that Buddhism has power. Monks would supplant the local practitioners of religion, local clergy, and the local practices of appeasing Nagas and Naga-like creatures. And when they would do that, it would give them legitimacy. It would have them interact with the locals a lot more. The Nagas represent the supernatural horde, and the fact that Buddhism and Buddhists have power over them. There's an unseen hordes of deities all around us at all times. Now, also let's remember that all of these deities are alive in all images. They're alive at the place. So they represent sort of the unseen living creatures around there. Now, the fact that the Buddhists got so interested in integrating this Naga cult shows that they had some similar ideas of stuff going on when you build a place, as you see in later rituals that Hindus have, specifically in the Tantras, about temple building. So when you build a Hindu temple, one of the first things you have to do is you have to like draw a large diagram and then do a divination. And in that diagram, you figure out where the Naga that lives under the ground in the place is. And then the first stone you cast goes onto his head, wherever you've divined its head to be. That's the first stone, then you build everything around there. And the idea is that stone holds it in place. Otherwise, that Naga will move around, causing earthquakes or inspiring lightning strikes. So when you build a temple, you have to get control of the Naga underground. In a similar way, when they built these caves, they set up the Naga King to make comfortable the Nagas of the area. All right, so now we have Harati. So Harati is a Yakshini. Now, Yaksas are tree spirits. They are found, excuse the barking dog in the background. I know, it's very exciting. I think he's chasing himself in a mirror right now. So Yakshas, Yakshinis, and Harati. Just 1 second. Quiet. Okay, sorry, I had to yell at my dog. So here are some Yakshas here. We see that sort of throughout the Buddhist world, Buddhist monastic culture and Buddhist monks tried to appeal to Yakshas. Yakshas were local tree spirits, but they were also protectors of the Buddha and Buddhist monasteries. When the Buddha was born, a Yaksha tree spirit sort of, his mother reached up to hold on to the tree, and the tree spirit removed the pains of her giving birth. So we see a whole bunch of connections with Yakshas and Buddhism. Yakshas who aren't integrated into Buddhism, they usually accept bloody offerings, liquor, sacrifice, and whatnot. We see them being associated with curing the illnesses of children. Buddhists, when they integrate Yakshas in, they generally have a pretty good relationship with the Yakshas, and a lot of our earliest Buddhist art has lots of depictions of Yakshas, which shows that Buddhists were always interested in connecting with these local pantheons. So the relationship was good with Yakshas unless Yakshas go bad. We see actually that the worship of the Shiva Linga was originally associated with Yakshas. So we think actually that Yakshas were worshipped in Linga form, and then later Shiva was associated with the Linga. An interesting thing with Buddhism, again, is lots of the names of our bodhisattvas come from Yaksha names. So some of our earliest common Yakshas in South India are named Vajradhara or Vajrapani. We may remember those names of bodhisattvas. Okay, so Harati, in fact, was an upasika. So that's a lay devotee who, according to some accounts, attained the stage of Shrotapati, which means like stream enter, thereby entering the direct path to liberation. An early Mahayana treatise even calls her a great bodhisattva. So our Yakshini here, though we're going to talk about her myth in a second, she is considered to be an exemplary practitioner. Again, like sort of the stories of these great Nagas that get depicted in various places in Ajanta, they were great aspirants to Buddhism. So she was considered a bodhisattva. Again, the connection of Yakshas and bodhisattvas. So what's the story of Harati? Well, the Buddha tells this story where there's a Yakshini, and usually the Yakshinis are pretty good spirits, but this one's pretty mean, who made a vow in her prior birth to eat all the babies in a town called Rajagriha. Why'd she make that? Hard to say. So she's reborn as a Yakshini and has 500 children herself. Every day she goes and eats a couple of babies in this town, Rajagriha. So Buddha's like, man, this is not cool. I can't deal with this anymore. This is too much for us. So he steals one of her children. She gets nuts. She just goes crazy looking for her child. And the Buddha turns to her and says, look, here's your kid. I got it. And she's like, oh! And he says, you got so upset over the loss of one child. You have 500. How do you think other people are going to feel, if they lose, one of their children, they only have 2 or only 1? And she gets all moody and upset about this. And the Buddha says, all right, let's get some Buddhism going on. So she converts to Buddhism. And in fact, she says, well, what about all my kids? How am I going to take care of my kids if I'm now a Buddhist and I don't have any of this baby flesh to feed to them? And the monks say, no, we got you. So what they do is they put an image of Harati up and they give her a food offering in the dining hall of every monastery. In this way, she is fed, but she also gives over the care of her children to these monks. So what's going on with that? And here are some more pictures of Harati. On the right are 2 pictures of Harati at Ajanta. You will see that she's depicted with children. You'll see that she has sort of hand gestures, and those hand gestures are of giving wishes, and the other is of granting general prosperity. I'll talk more about that in a second. Okay. I'm going to skip forward to this. So she lends her children to the monastery, and the monks are going to feed her daily, but they're also going to take care of her children. It's not clear how they're going to do this. We do see within Buddhism that children are often become monks. In the contemporary world, a lot of people who become monks only do it for a couple of years, and then they disrobe and lead a layperson life. But we do see evidence in Jainism and somewhat in Buddhism of Buddhist monasteries that would adopt orphan children, and they would initiate them into Buddhism and becoming monks at a very young age. So I would guess that this story of her giving her children over to the monks, gives a legitimacy for Buddhist monks taking in orphans to become young monks. That's a guess, but I think that's going on there. So I want to give you another sort of theoretical concept, and that one is of the tooth mother. I think Wendy Doniger wrote about this, that there are mothers, these goddesses, of the tooth and of the breast. So she is also what's called a balagraha, or a Caesar of children, Harati when she's not a Buddhist. So as a tooth mother, she's vicious. She bites. You know, she doesn't offer you her breast in order to sort of nurture you. She's vicious and kind of bloody. But as she's Buddhicized, as she's put into place in this place, she's almost transformed into a goddess of the breast. So she upholds this varada, which means giving of gifts, and then the other one is like, it's kind of like this. It's a shreyas mudra, which gives general auspiciousness. Because she's depicted with children, we think that she was often prayed to by barren folk in order to gain children. She was definitely vowed to, as are lots of Yakshinis, to cure childhood diseases. Yes. Okay. So in a way, what we were talking about with the Buddhists before is she was translocal, in that she's found in all these Buddhist monasteries. But when the Buddhists got to Ajanta, they had her ready to plug and play. They just boom, put her in there, put her in the monastery sort of dining hall, and then she, by virtue of herself, will control the other Yakshinis around. So she functions like Nagendra, like the Naga King, except she is from another place and she's instantiated there in Ajanta. Now we see that she's often worshipped in a place called Poshada, or in a time called Poshada. Now that's a rainy season festival in which the laity would come and give gifts to the monks. And at this time you would see the Buddha and all the bodhisattvas depicted at one end of the dining hall, and then at the other end would be Harati. So it shows that she's in the lower end of the Buddhist pantheon, but it also shows that she's still very important. We do see in these frescoes that lay women worship Harati, showing a manner in which the monastic order was attending the problems of childbirth and child death. Monastic activity supports the life of the laity. So by us seeing that she was worshipped by lay people, we can see that the monks were concerned with child death and childhood disease, because that's the type of deity she is. And then the Buddhist monks worshiping her would also attend to child death and child disease. So we see that these very realistic problems are addressed by worshiping these goddesses. So what about our guy in, we've been talking about cave 20, now we're going to talk about this Buddha in cave 16. Look at this Buddha. He just looks different than any other Buddha we've seen before. So in this way, and what we're looking at is this Buddha looks like Harishena. And we have the inscription actually makes this very clear, that they built this Buddha to look like Harishena. In this way, the transcendental Buddha, who has completely removed the world, becomes localized. So he still has his translocal character, but by being a double for that very real king, the Buddha becomes of that king's domain, and then by putting that Buddha in Ajanta, he becomes the Buddha of that very location at Ajanta. So this stone Buddha here is based on the person of Harishena. So the Buddha in cave 16 was not a member of Harishena's clan per se, but it's him himself. So remember that Harishena is also Harati Putra, the son of Harati. Harati was the tutelary deity of his Vakataka family and clan. So again, like I said, they're not just depicting him like he's a part of the clan, like he's a part of this Vakataka clan. They are depicting him as this king himself. So, but again, with this, remember this Harati is involved again in this, because Harati is the tutelary deity of this clan. So you have so it's almost like Harati shows the clan is involved, but this Buddha shows that, boom, it is, we are talking about this specific ruler. We see that we think, or at least Walter Spink thinks, and I think he's right, that originally they were going to depict this Buddha in the lotus pose with his legs folded, but there was a war halfway through Harishena's rule, and at that time they decided, let's make this Buddha more manly, more imperial. So he's depicted this sort of funny way in what they call the imperial style, or the European style, as if he's like a Westerner sitting on a throne. Now, Gregory Chopin has argued, and he's a very important thinker, that these stone Buddhas, wherever you see them, were actually thought to be alive in the monasteries. They were thought to be the heads of the monastic community. So the Buddha is like the king of the area, and the monks are his troops. And Harishena is the actual king of the area with actual troops. So again, you see that a ruler bases himself on the idea of the Buddha as a universal sovereign. The Chakravartin, the lord of all the kingdoms, is considered like the Dharmavartin, the lord of all the Dharmas. Remember that the Buddha was said to either become a great universal emperor or a great religious person. Well, here we have those connected, and that the guy who wants to be a Chakravartin, Harishena, is depicted as looking like the Buddha. So it builds an interesting feedback loop. So this Buddha was sort of remade in the form of Harishena, or Haritiputra, the son of Hariti, who was the ruler in the 5th century. And here's just a picture of the Buddha and Indra. What's sort of interesting is we have an inscription in the area by the Harishena Buddha figure that says that Harishena is like Indra. So he's like Indra in this world. And the Buddha in general is like an ascetic Indra. Remember, Indra is the king of the gods in the Rig Veda. He rides an elephant. He's very powerful. He has a lightning bolt or a rainbow as his weapon. So again, we see Dharmavartin, Chakravartin. Just like the Buddha is the Dharmavartin, Harishena is the Chakravartin. Harishena is like the actual Indra, and Buddha is like an ascetic version of Indra. So it's constantly showing this back and forth between the local ruler and the Buddha to make that Buddha a Buddha of the place, but also to legitimate the rule of that in particular ruler. So what happens is the temple legitimates Harishena's rule in the area. And it also reminds people that, you know, the Buddha lives there, that translocal Buddha, he does live there in the form of this very local version. So the translocal Buddha becomes localized. So there's a thinker named Hermann Kolke who argues that there are 3 strategies, and Cohen writes about this, for integrating royalty and royal power in a community. And also look at the way these guys are sitting, sort of very similar to the imperial style in which the Buddha is depicted, this Harishena Buddha. But you'll also notice that his right leg is up and his left leg is down, which is the same way that Nagendra, the Naga King, was depicted. So we kind of see a blend of both those forms here in these sort of traditional pictures of what looks like Mughal kings. Maharaja Vikramaditya, I believe he was supposed to be a Maurya, in fact. Okay, so what are the 3 ways? 1, a king can patronize pilgrimage spots. 2, they can grant lands to Brahmana Agraharas, so you give lands to Brahmins, and then the Brahmins take the taxes from those lands, that supports themselves. And finally, building imperial temples. So temples to gods, but that are associated with rulers. So how do these apply to Ajanta? Arlo, what? Ajanta would have just been sort of like a village. It would have been a village on a pilgrimage route. Because it was on this long trade route, there would have been pilgrims there, because pilgrims go on trade routes and pilgrimage runs. The surrounding villages would have had sort of their taxes donated to the upkeep of the monastery, and the king would have set that up as well. And finally, we have Harishena, this Vakataka leader, who has a Buddha designed to look just like him. So those 3 modes of setting down roots and legitimacy and locality is found in Ajanta. All right, so this is the end. And I would like to tell you that if you do go to India and you want to go to see Ajanta, think very carefully, because they say there are 2 places you can go. You can go to Ellora and Ajanta. Both are cave temples. This is a picture of Ellora, and it is way cooler. Look at that. That is the mountain they carved off. So they didn't bring in any of that stone. They just carved stone away to build that. And then there's flanking this one huge area, and that's about 6 stories tall right there. There's cave complexes all around, some Buddhist, some Hindu, and some magnificent Jain ones. I went to Ellora first, and I was like, this is astounding. I can't wait to go to Ajanta. And I went to Ajanta, and I was like, all right, some caves, some frescoes I can't see. There's a couple of images that are hard to look at. And I want to go back to Ellora. So that's what I have to say. All right, have a great one. See you next time.